Are you even qualified to work here? Those words cut deep, but Sophia refused to let them define her. Humiliated by her boss in front of the entire office, she could have given up, but she didn't. Instead, she worked tirelessly to prove her worth. But what happens when the tables turn? Will her hard work finally pay off, or will she be silenced once again? Watch until the end to find out. Like, subscribe, and share for more inspiring stories. Sofia Martinez sat at her desk, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she meticulously reviewed the latest financial reports. The soft hum of office chatter and ringing phones filled the air of the downtown Chicago financial firm where she worked. Unlike most of her colleagues, who took their time settling in for the day, Sophia had already been at her desk for an hour, sipping her now cold coffee while double-checking figures that others would skim through. She wasn't here to impress anyone. She wasn't here to climb the corporate ladder. She was here to survive. For Sophia, work was more than just a career. It was a lifeline for her family back home in the Philippines. Every month, half of her paycheck went straight to her parents and younger brother, covering school fees, medical bills, and household expenses. Her father, once a proud fisherman, had been injured in a typhoon years ago, leaving him unable to work. Her mother, a seamstress, did what she could, but it was never enough. That was why Sophia couldn't afford to fail. Despite her dedication, Sophia remained invisible to Richard Coleman, the firm's finance director. A man in his 50s with graying hair and an ever-present frown, Richard had built his reputation on being ruthless, blunt, and dismissive, especially toward employees he deemed insignificant. Sophia had long since accepted that to him. She was just another faceless worker in the vast corporate machine. Richard barely acknowledged her in meetings. He never praised her reports, even when they were flawless. When she spoke, he cut her off. And worst of all, he constantly overlooked her contributions, handing credit to others. Sophia had spent years gritting her teeth and pushing forward, refusing to let his attitude break her. But she was about to find out that Richard's indifference was about to turn into humiliation. It happened on a Monday morning, just after Sophia had sent in a quarterly financial report she had spent the entire weekend perfecting. She was deep in work when she heard Richard's voice, sharp and cold, cut through the hum of the office. "Sophia, my office now." Heads turned. Conversations stopped. A tight knot formed in her stomach, but she quickly composed herself. Rising from her chair, she adjusted her simple blouse and skirt, grabbed her notebook, and walked toward Richard's office with steady steps. The moment she entered, she realized something was wrong. The glass-walled conference room wasn't empty. Every key team member was seated inside. Managers, analysts, senior accountants, people who had no reason to be there unless something big was happening. Sophia hesitated, her heart hammering. Why was she being called in front of all these people? Richard stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Something felt off. "Sit down," he ordered. Swallowing hard, Sophia obeyed, lowering herself into the lone empty chair at the center of the room. The weight of every gaze bore down on her. Something was coming. Something bad. Will Sophia allow herself to be trampled on, or will she fight back? Sophia sat stiffly in her chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, as Richard Coleman stood at the head of the conference table, flipping through a printed version of the quarterly financial report she had submitted. His expression was one of thinly veiled disdain, his lips pressed into a tight line as he skimmed over the pages. The silence in the room was suffocating. She could feel the weight of her colleagues' stares, some curious, some indifferent, and some shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The tension crackled in the air like a brewing storm. And then, the storm hit. Richard slammed the report onto the table with an exaggerated motion, making several employees flinch. He let out a sharp sigh before fixing Sophia with an icy glare. Are you sure you're even qualified to work here?" The words sliced through the air like a blade. Sophia's stomach churned. She felt the heat rise to her cheeks, but she forced herself to stay calm. This was not the first time Richard had spoken down to her, but this time was different. This time, he wasn't doing it behind closed doors. This time, he was humiliating her in front of everyone. She opened her mouth to respond, but Richard didn't give her the chance. He held up the report like it was garbage. "This is unacceptable," he sneered. "The projections are inconsistent, the calculations are sloppy, and I wouldn't trust this data to run a lemonade stand, let alone this company's financials." Sophia's fingers dug into the fabric of her skirt beneath the table. She had spent hours double-checking that report. Every figure, every graph, every analysis had been meticulously reviewed. She knew that it was accurate, but Richard didn't care about accuracy. He cared about making her look incompetent. Her colleagues exchanged uneasy glances, but no one spoke up. Not the analysts who had worked alongside her. Not the managers who had seen her pull late nights at the office. Not even those who knew Richard's criticism was unfair. They all stayed silent. And that silence hurt more than Richard's words. She wanted to fight back, to stand up and defend her work, but she knew how that would end. Richard wasn't the kind of boss who tolerated defiance. If she argued, he would twist her words against her. And if she lost this job, what would happen to her family? She swallowed the lump in her throat and forced herself to stay composed. "I will fix the report," she said, her voice steady despite the tightness in her chest. Richard raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Fix it," he repeated, his tone mocking. "Sophia, the problem isn't just the report, it's you." A cold dread settled in her stomach. If you can't even handle something this basic, then maybe you don't belong here at all. The words hung in the air, heavy and unforgiving. She could feel the pity in some of her coworkers' gazes, but no one dared to intervene. Richard waved a dismissive hand toward the door. "Get back to your desk. We'll discuss your future with this company later." Sophia stood, her legs unsteady beneath her, but she refused to let them see her break. She lifted her chin, took a deep breath, and walked out of the conference room, her dignity barely intact. But inside, she was crumbling. That evening, Sophia sat in her tiny apartment, staring blankly at the financial report on her laptop. The numbers blurred together as her mind replayed Richard's words over and over again. "Are you sure you're even qualified to work here? If you can't handle something this basic, maybe you don't belong here at all." Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, but she couldn't bring herself to type. Her phone buzzed, breaking her trance. It was a video call from home. She hesitated before answering. The screen lit up with the familiar sight of her mother's warm smile. "Anak, how was your day?" Sophia forced a smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "It was fine, Mama. Just busy." Her mother beamed. "You work too hard, my child, but we are so proud of you." Sophia's chest tightened. If only they knew. If only they knew how hard today had really been. She wanted to tell her mother everything, to say that she felt humiliated, small, worthless. That she had spent years proving herself, yet she was still treated like she didn't belong. But she couldn't. She couldn't burden them with her struggles. So instead, she laughed softly and said, "Don't worry, Mama, I can handle it." Even if deep down she wasn't sure she could. The humiliation from the meeting still clung to Sophia like a heavy weight. Every time she replayed Richard Coleman's words in her head, her stomach twisted. The whispers in the office, the silent pity in her coworkers' eyes, it all made her want to disappear. But she couldn't. She had come too far, sacrificed too much, and worked too hard to let one man decide her worth. She would not give up. If Richard wanted to believe she was incompetent, she would prove him wrong, not just to him, but to the entire company. That night, When most employees had already packed up and left, Sophia remained at her desk. The office was eerily quiet, the fluorescent lights humming softly above her. She opened a new spreadsheet and started analyzing the company's sales and financial performance over the past 5 years. This wasn't just about fixing a report. If she wanted to prove her value, she had to go beyond expectations. She needed to present something undeniably impressive. Her fingers moved swiftly over the keyboard as she compared data trends, identified inefficiencies, and formulated strategies for improvement. Every number, every graph, every financial projection had to be flawless. Hours passed. Her coffee had gone cold and her eyes burned from staring at the screen for too long. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. It was almost 10 p.m. when she heard a voice behind her. "Still here?" Sophia startled slightly and turned around. Standing by her desk was Daniel Carter, a senior financial expert in the company. In his mid-40s, with graying hair and a reputation for fairness, he was one of the few people in the office Sophia actually respected. She quickly straightened in her chair, embarrassed to be caught working so late. I had some things to finish." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "That looks like more than just some things." He glanced at her screen, noting the complex spreadsheets filled with detailed financial trends. "This is impressive." "What exactly are you working on?" Sophia hesitated. Should she tell him? Would he think she was desperate, that she was just trying to redeem herself? After a pause, she sighed. "I need to prove I belong here." Daniel studied her for a moment before pulling up a chair. "Mind if I take a look?" Sophia hesitated, but eventually she nodded and turned the screen toward him. For the next few minutes, Daniel carefully scrolled through the data. His expression shifted from curiosity to admiration. "You know," he said, leaning back in his chair, "this isn't just good. This is the kind of analysis executives would actually listen to." Sophia blinked. "You think so?" Daniel smiled. "I know so. But if you really want to make an impact, you'll need to refine the way you present it." Sophia bit her lip. "I was going to make a report," Daniel chuckled. "No, Sophia, you need to make it a strategy. Anyone can run numbers, but only real leaders turn them into solutions." She stared at him, processing his words. A strategy, not just a report. Richard Coleman had made her feel small, replaceable, insignificant, but Daniel was showing her something different. He was treating her like she mattered, like she was capable. For the next 2 hours, Daniel sat with Sophia as they refined her work. He helped her identify the strongest data points. He guided her in structuring her insights into a clear, compelling presentation. He challenged her ideas, pushing her to think like a leader. And for the first time since the disaster with Richard, Sophia felt hope. As they wrapped up, Daniel leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "Sometimes, the best people don't get recognized right away." Sophia met his gaze, something flickering in her chest. "Then I guess I'll just have to make them see me." Daniel grinned. "That's the spirit." With renewed determination, Sophia saved her work and prepared for the critical company meeting that would change everything. The day of the crucial meeting had arrived. Sophia stood outside the executive conference room, clutching the printed version of her financial strategy. Her fingers were cold despite the heat coursing through her veins. Inside that room sat the company's most powerful figures, including Evelyn Carter, the CEO. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. This was her chance. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and stepped inside. The room was sleek and intimidating, with a long mahogany table surrounded by high-ranking executives, senior analysts, and department heads. All eyes turned toward her. At the head of the table sat Evelyn Carter, a woman in her early 50s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Next to her was Richard Coleman, arms crossed, his usual scowl in place. Daniel Carter sat near the middle, offering her a slight nod of encouragement. "Let's begin," Evelyn said, motioning for Sophia to take the floor. Sophia inhaled deeply, steadying her nerves before she spoke. Good morning, everyone. Today, I will be presenting a revised financial strategy that identifies key trends in our company's revenue streams, as well as practical solutions to optimize our performance. She connected her laptop to the projector, and a graph appeared on the screen. The room fell silent as Sophia dived into the data, breaking down profit margins, expense patterns, and areas where the company had been bleeding money unknowingly. The more she spoke, the more confident she became. This wasn't just a report. This was a strategy that could change the company. As Sophia flipped to the next slide, Richard leaned forward, clearing his throat loudly. "Miss Martinez," he interrupted, "while I appreciate your enthusiasm, I think we need to acknowledge that financial strategies require experience. You've only been in this company a few years. Are you sure your projections are even accurate?" A familiar chill of humiliation threatened to creep back into her chest, but not this time. Before Sophia could respond, Daniel spoke up. "I've reviewed her projections," Daniel said, his voice calm but firm. "And I can confirm that they are not only accurate but incredibly insightful." The room turned to Daniel. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. "In fact," Daniel continued, looking directly at Richard, "Miss Martinez's analysis found cost-saving measures that our previous strategies completely overlooked." Evelyn Carter raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Richard's face darkened, his jaw tightening. Sophia seized the moment. She advanced to the next slide, detailing a cost-cutting strategy that could save the company millions without compromising growth. The executives leaned in, nodding as they took notes. "This is very well thought out," Evelyn finally said, tapping her pen against the table. "Tell me, Miss Martinez, how did you arrive at these conclusions?" Sophia stood her ground. "I studied our financial reports over the last 5 years," she explained. "I compared our expenditure trends and noticed inconsistencies that had not been addressed. By realigning our investments in key areas, we can maximize profitability while improving efficiency." She answered every question with precision, backing her claims with data. By the time she reached the final slide, the room had transformed. Executives who had barely looked at her before were now watching her with interest. A beat of silence followed. Then applause erupted. Sophia blinked, momentarily stunned. They were applauding her, not dismissing her, not humiliating her. Applauding her. Even Evelyn Carter gave an approving nod. Richard, on the other hand, sat motionless. Sophia turned to look at him, expecting anger, but instead she saw something else, shock. He had underestimated her. And now, in front of everyone, he was witnessing what she was truly capable of. As the applause died down, Evelyn leaned back in her chair. "Well done, Miss Martinez." Sophia exhaled a breath she didn't know she was holding. She had done it. She had finally proven herself. The meeting had ended, but Sophia's world had just begun to shift. As she gathered her notes, still basking in the unexpected applause, she heard a voice behind her. "Miss Martinez, a word in my office." Sophia turned to see Evelyn Carter, the CEO, standing at the door of the conference room. The other executives murmured among themselves as they filed out, casting glances at Sophia. This time, not with pity, but with curiosity and respect. Her heart pounded as she followed Evelyn into her sleek, glass-walled office. Evelyn took a seat behind her large wooden desk, motioning for Sophia to do the same. For a moment, the CEO studied her, tapping a pen thoughtfully against her palm. "I was impressed with your presentation," Evelyn finally said. "It was sharp, well-researched, and most importantly, actionable." Sophia's fingers tightened slightly around her notepad. Was this really happening? Evelyn leaned forward, her gaze intense. You have leadership potential, Sophia, and we need people like you in this company. Sophia's breath caught. Which is why I'm promoting you, Evelyn continued, to head of financial strategy. For a moment, Sophia thought she had misheard. I'm sorry, ma'am, she stammered. Evelyn's lips quirked into a small smile. You've earned this, Sophia. Effective immediately, you'll be leading our financial strategy department. A whirlwind of emotions surged through her, disbelief, excitement, pride. She had fought so hard for recognition, and now it was finally hers. As Sophia stepped out of Evelyn's office, her mind still reeling, she nearly collided with Richard Coleman. For the first time since she had known him, he looked hesitant. Sophia, he said, his voice lower than usual. Can we talk? Sophia crossed her arms, meeting his gaze head-on. What is it, Mr. Coleman? Richard exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. I misjudged you, he admitted. I underestimated your abilities, and that was a mistake. Sophia studied him carefully. This was the man who had humiliated her, who had dismissed her, who had tried to break her. She had every right to throw his words back at him, to revel in his discomfort. But instead, she simply said, Respect doesn't come from words, Mr. Coleman. It comes from actions. Richard gave a small nod, understanding the deeper meaning behind her words. This conversation wasn't about forgiveness. It was about change. That night, as Sophia sat in her tiny apartment, the city lights glowing outside her window, she pulled out her phone and typed a message. Mama, I did it. A few seconds later, her mother's reply popped up. We always knew you would. Sophia smiled, feeling an overwhelming sense of peace. She had proven herself, but more importantly, she had never given up. Lessons and message. Sophia's journey is a testament to the power of self-belief and resilience. Despite being underestimated and humiliated, she refused to let others define her value. Instead of allowing Richard's words to break her, she took control of her own narrative and proved her worth through action, not words. Sophia did not take shortcuts or rely on sympathy to gain recognition. She worked tirelessly, refined her skills, and let her results speak for themselves. In the end, her dedication led to a well-deserved promotion, proving that true effort never goes unnoticed. When Richard finally acknowledged his mistake, Sophia had the choice to retaliate or rise above. She chose dignity over revenge, showing that real strength comes from knowing when to let go and focusing on moving forward. Sophia's story reminds us that success isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right. What about you? Have you ever faced a situation where you had to prove your worth? Share your experience below.